Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Hope everyone had a great weekend. Thank you for tuning into GNG LinkedIn Live segment. It's Gil and Gurpreet. Today, we have an interesting topic that we want to talk about, and it is about COVID-19 and returning to work. So, as everybody's aware, as countries, well, let's focus on Canada and US, but a lot of companies are sorry, not companies, a lot of countries are loosening up a little bit, provinces and states. Some companies have seen where they're actually allowed to be open retail. Some stores are being open around Canada and US. And in Ontario, this weekend we saw hardware stores, garden centers open up to the public, and so more and more businesses are going to start to open up. But what does that mean? What does that look like? So what's that return to work going to look like if your company has decided to open up their offices? What is that going to look like? Is it going to be all the way it was before, which we know it's not going to be? So we're going to have a candid discussion around this, and also give tips and advice to companies, but also you as an individual that may be excited to go back to work. But hey, we also want to make sure that you have the clear reality picture of what it could possibly look like to go back into the office and be working. So hope everybody had a great weekend. If you're in Toronto, then we got a dose of winter. Like, where did this come from, Mother Nature? And this morning it was snowing in some parts. So hopefully we're in for some good weather coming this week, and we don't have to relive our winter during spring.
It's supposed to be nice here by the end of the week.
That's what I saw too. But one thing I've learned about weather networks is it's Mother Nature. We don't know until the day you wake up, and then it's confirmed that that's how the weather's going to be, but still not confirmed. So hopefully this week we'll have some great sunshine, because that's in the forecast. So let's start the segment, and let's talk about COVID-19 and returning to work. What does it look like? What do we need to know? And how we as individuals can also protect ourselves, as well what companies can do to make the transition smoother and easier, and also when we're at work. So Gail, let's start with you.
Certainly. So the first thing is about this return to work is that from everything we've seen with the pandemic, there's always been a talk of a second and possibly a third wave. And so the reality is that we need to take that into consideration as we return to work. We need to do what we can to minimize that risk, and certainly minimize the risk of ourselves and those around us. And so that's the first consideration, is that it's not that as things open, that means, we're free to open up however we are. And we've seen too many organizations that have tried to take advantage and have taken advantage of their people through these times to try to force them into unsafe work conditions. So by having that consideration, starting with that consideration in mind of trying to make sure that there isn't a second wave or limit the second wave, that should be the first priority. That should be the number one priority. Something else that I'll always push in this is that include your people in the decisions. Understand from them what they are and aren't comfortable with. Understand from them, maybe they have ideas of how to protect themselves and others that you might not have come up with. It might not be on that best practice list that you happen to read. But there are a lot of great ideas out there. So make sure that you include people to understand where they're coming from, because there's going to be a lot of anxiety about this return. Yeah. There's going to be a lot of concern about this return. Some people may not feel safe. Some people have likely developed a certain sense of xenophobia of, fearing those around them, that it's you're not a family member and trying to stay away. And that can get deeply ingrained. So those are the things that I would start with at a high level when talking about going back to work.
I think the first place companies actually have to start with is the design of their space. If you're startup or small business in downtown, you've probably opted out, you know, it's not even downtown Toronto, but any country or any city, maybe, real estate prices are higher or rent's high. So you opted for a smaller space because that's what you can afford. But then you had everybody cramped up into the space. So the unique thing is, I was reading this article. The thing is, as businesses do open up, you still have to practice the social distancing, even at work. So the first place if you're looking to reopen your office or your business and you want employees to come back to work, the first thing you're going to have to do is, before you even invite your employees back to work, is you're going to have to design the workspace where everybody is physically distanced. So the desk space. So if you had people in cubicles, that's too close of a space. You're going to have to widen those cubicles. So the distance is 2 meters to like at least 6 feet. Maybe it's 2 meters now. So you're going to have to look at those guidelines on that. How many people do you allow at a time in the office is going to be a barrier. I was reading this great article that said, and it makes sense, because just because we're opening up businesses more in the coming weeks and months, there's few more business will open, but that doesn't mean that we just forget about social distancing. We still have to practice social distancing. So that also means, well, how many people can you allow at a time in the office? So you're going to have to think about scheduling. You may also adapt where you allow some people in the office so they can be possibly, let's say if your space is small and physically where people can be 2 meters to 6 feet apart, that's maybe say 10 people, 20 people, right? So then only 20 people can be in the office at a time, right? Also, so then you have to plan that. Maybe you do half the people, so you're gonna have to plan those schedules where, okay, only 10 people today can come into work. And then maybe you split it. Maybe you can do 4 hours in the office and 4 hours at home. So you're altering the people in the office. But other key thing to remember is what the distancing of entering into the building. So if you have a standalone office building for your business, you're still gonna have to, everyone can just come in together. You're gonna still have to space out as people enter into the office. But if you are in a building, leasing a space, that's how many companies going back into the space, how many people coming in. Again, that's gonna be social distancing. So not everyone, just like how we've been experiencing when we go to grocery stores, we have to line up. That's actually what's gonna happen in the buildings downtown and any office spaces. You're gonna have to actually line up to go into the actual office. And once you're in there, I was reading that then you can't leave for breaks.
It's going to be tough, and I would actually say, even taking it a step before the entrance of the building is taking into consideration the risks around people coming to the building in the first place. Because if you have an office downtown, you likely have people commuting by public transit, which puts people at greater risk than if you have an office out in Mississauga, in Northern Toronto. If you have somewhere an office where everybody drives to the office, that's one level of risk. But if you're expecting everybody to take the subway downtown or take the train downtown or whatever it is, then you're putting them at further risk beyond just the social distancing that they need, which you're absolutely right. They need to consider physical office space and physical office design. There's also another aspect that I was thinking about, and it comes from something that you've mentioned multiple times throughout our calls, which is about just the individual situations that people are in parents and everything, that as we open up, businesses in Ontario, we're not opening up schools. So there are people that you may want to call back to the office who still have children at home, and asking for daycare or any kind of that is an impossibility right now. So that's something also to consider for employers, that just because they're going to start opening things up doesn't mean that you need to. Doesn't mean that you should. And I've actually spoken to a couple of founders, CEOs who have said that we know that we're going to be opened up. We know we're going to be able to go back to the office within the next month. But that doesn't mean any of us are really going back into the office in the next month. We're actually going to be delaying the entrance back to the office and relying on remote work situations because that's what's safest for our people. Because based on the situation that we have, it's not ideal, but I'd rather take the hit, and that's a values decision of a leader saying, I'd rather take the hit that people will be working from remote and having slightly less interaction, productivity, whatever it is, than forcing them back into the office in a way that will put any of their safety or health at risk.
But you know what? You're touching on a great point because, like, I'm going to break a few things you mentioned that were actually companies need to look at. One is the situations with the kids at home. So if you're going to come if you're opening your office, and then there's parents with kids at home, I want to share something. Somebody just a few days ago messaged me. I think it was on a Friday. So last week, someone messaged me asking for my advice. What happened was, I won't disclose names or anything like that or company names, but a company has notified an employee saying you have to come back to work. And if you don't come back to work, we're going to assume you quit. So the individual said, well, I can't come back to work because I have kids. But the employer is being adamant that you come back, and if you don't, we're going to say you quit. Your ROE is going to be filled as you quit. And there is an HR involved here. So I want to just caution every employer out there. I understand you need staff and you need to open, especially if you're like a restaurant or anything like that where you need physical manpower to operate. You cannot threaten your employees to come back to work, or you're gonna terminate them, or you're gonna classify them as quit in a situation where their parents. What you need to do in this situation is say, no problem. Here's your options. You can go on a leave. That leave is still active. It's available under COVID-19 for parents to go on the leave, a job protected leave, to provide care for their kids because schools are not open, daycare is not open. You can't threaten the employee. So I gave the individual the advice and like, hey, go back to your employer and say, listen, I understand you need me, but here's my situation. I don't have childcare because of under the circumstances. I want to go on the leave under COVID-19. So the ROE needs to read leave of absence, not quit. So just a caution around that as well, because that's a lawsuit waiting to happen. If you file quit and you say you terminate your employee because you didn't show up, so you quit, that employee can go sue you for wrongful termination.
Well, it sounds like it's a double whammy there because one, to fire them or to terminate the employment is bad enough, right? For that I'm firing you, but then to also claim that it's the person quitting, that just makes it a double whammy. And I mean, was this in Ontario?
Yeah.
Okay, because everything I've
I'll say one thing. It's not a small business. It's actually a big Fortune company that's doing this.
And which is unfortunate and not surprising because they probably think they can get away with it with their lawyers. But the reality is everything I've read and everything I've seen about Ontario employment courts is that their initial instinct is to side with the employee because in these situations that it's the employer that is in power, especially if it's a large corporation that has the resources to withstand. It's not a small company. It's not a small mom and pop shop relying on this individual to survive and especially their attendants to survive.
Yeah.
That is, I'd like to say surprising, but it's not. It's
never a surprise. But it is a little bit of surprising. What shocked me was I actually asked to get the information. Well, does the company have HR? I said, is this a small business? They said no. Then they disclosed the company name. I go, well, okay, is it a franchisee owner? No, this is the company because the company has franchise. No, because like I want to understand before I jump to gun on anything.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, and then they said this is they have an HR and the HR has been communicating this. The HR manager is saying this. I was like, oh, okay. Then I was taken back. I'm in HR too, so I was really taken back by this situation, and especially right now. So yeah, that's my surprise. What if, before COVID-19, maybe I wouldn't be surprised, but the fact that we're in a situation, there is tons of information thrown at us every day. The government has stepped up from day one, provided all these resources. For a company not to know of that magnitude of size, a Fortune 500 company, not to know the resources to help properly navigate with the employee, that's where I was actually taken back and surprised. Is like, how do you not know this? I can understand smaller businesses may not know certain
Because
things.
that's what they're motivated by, right? That's what they're focused on, because their manager is pushing a certain direction in a certain reward structure. Right now, they're under tremendous pressure, right? They're under and so if they're under tremendous pressure, their manager's under tremendous pressure, et cetera, on up the scale, there is likely a lot of poor decision making going on out there.
Yeah.
Because because look, the person who's doing this, the person who made that decision, is likely scared about their own job. And the person who's managing them is likely scared about their own job, right? And so if everybody doesn't have job stability right now and doesn't have their own financial wellness, they're driven by factors that aren't necessarily going to be in the best interest of the organization, and certainly aren't going to be in the best interests of others. They're looking out for themselves. That's what happens when we are tested like that. The organization, it says what their values are. It says what the culture they've driven over the years, and now it's coming home to roost.
So I just want to say, as you look to go back to work, you have to look at these things too. Even right now, as if a lot of us are working from home, if you have individuals that are parents, let them know they have an option on going on a leave, and if you can afford to top off the leave, because when you go on a leave, it's EI leave, right? So you get up to 60%. If you are in a situation where you can help maybe cover the rest of the 40% as a company, I suggest do that for your employees. Also, as you mentioned, the safety around going back to work, public transit. You need to look at these things. Is it, we will all love to get out of our houses, but is that feasible, right? Is that safe for us to do? So you're going to have to look at what's the best decision for your employees, not just for the business, because you're already kind of remote working, right? So a lot of us are remote working, and the businesses haven't, I'm not saying business weren't impacted, but then pivoted, and there's solutions coming up and working from home. So do you necessarily need to be in the office? And I've had some open, candid discussions, and I've seen some things around as well on LinkedIn. A lot of people are saying, we might just actually adopt working from home forever. We may not even go back to the office. Probably don't even. A lot of smaller organizations have actually come to realize probably don't need office. We can actually do virtual teams, right? We can do remote working. So you brought up a great point about the transit. People are relying on transit to get to work. Yeah, like that is a tough call, because we're already scared to go outside. We have to take all these cautions, but then now transit's going to also keep in mind that, okay, if you're going to open up business and you're going to have people people are going to have to take transit, but not everyone can be on the transit at one time. There's going to be social distancing practice even on transit. So that's not going to create a speedy time service for you to get to your work. So also employees thinking of going back to work, because I get it. You have an outlet now to get out of house, but before you make that call, think about these things practically. your
And
commute to work.
there is a real safety issue there, because I remember seeing lots of pictures, and then there was actually a study about the subway in New York, saying how the subway in New York was actually a contributing factor to the outbreak, because
The spike they had
the spike they had was a major contributing factor, because that even while the numbers were going up, what happened was New York Transit reduced the number of subways, increasing the number of people on platforms, increasing the number of people. So there were pictures in April of people on top of each other in these subways, and that was a major contributing factor. And so this is something we need to consider. And unfortunately, also, it's those who are generally in lower socioeconomic classes that are subject to this, right? People who are richer are able to drive to work or avoid having to go to work. I read something that it was, I forget the numbers, but generally the people in the top like 16% of like income brackets are least concerned about their jobs. Everyone else in Canada is. Right. So that's something for us to also consider, that these subways and how people get to work are a major factor. This isn't just about once we're at work, because you're right. Once we're at work, then we have to consider all of those design issues you started this conversation with, right? The fact that we have to remain 6-7 feet away from each other while we're working. We have to make sure we're cleaning everything. The reality is that because asymptomatic transmission seems to be so common with COVID, one of the suggestions that I was given by an emergency doctor here in Toronto is that all of us should be behaving as if we actually have it. And that's the true value of wearing masks, is that when we go out with a mask, and if we are asymptomatic and we don't know we could be transmitting it, that limits that transmission from us. And that's something to consider in the office too, right? That there could still be asymptomatic transmission, even 6-7 feet away from each other. We're all sharing stale office air, and that is a major risk factor. So if you are having people back in the office, you should be considering masks as well as a priority, because it will be protecting people. And you see the numbers.
Adding to your point, you have to also masks, so PPEs. You're gonna have PPEs available. You can't expect your employees to come into the office and also bring their own PPEs. You as an employer have to now, this is actually now a safety concern at work. So every employer now that's looking to open up their businesses, you have to, you have to work design plus PPEs. Which type of PPEs will you need to keep your employees safe? If you are like a retail or restaurants, like I've noticed on the weekend, I went to Wendy's for a burger. It's funny, I actually really not big on eating out, but because of COVID-19, I actually took an initiative to start supporting the local businesses, at least the restaurants. So I now a little bit once or twice eat out. I noticed Wendy's actually has all their employees wearing shield masks, which I thought was great. I haven't seen any others so far. Like yesterday, I went to A&W to grab my mom a veggie burger. They weren't wearing the shield mask. Another restaurant, I got food yesterday for Mother's Day. They actually, that was odd that they didn't do this. They had a shield at the cashier, but it's a meat shop that also cooks food that you can do takeouts. It does two things. But the other space where the meats were, they actually didn't have any shield protecting the employee. Yeah, they're telling you to stay 6 feet, but then why not take that extra measure, right?
Absolutely.
So I would say, yeah, you're gonna have to actually. It's not something you can just go back to work or say, hey, employees, go back to work, come back to work. You're gonna have to look at all these things in your office, your plant, whatever. Like if you're manufacturing that can open up now, you're gonna have to look at all these things, PPEs, how you're gonna protect your employees. Maybe it's having shields, who knows, but only you're gonna have to make that effort to look at how you can protect your employees, but also employees. You also If your employee doesn't feel comfortable coming back to work and you've been doing remote work, then let them do remote work. My friend, who's an HR director at a company, I'm not going to disclose the company name, but that's what they're doing. They're opening, it's a retail company. So they're looking at, I think Nova Scotia, they've opened up their stores, but every single employee that can work from home, you work from home. So I thought that was a great initiative. I'm like, yeah, that's actually good. Like, so they're not going to tell everybody to come back to work unless you have to physically, yeah, of course the store opens, so the store employees a little bit have to be there, but that entire province employees who can work from home can continue to work from home. Only people that have to be in the stores, they're putting in a plan on how to transition them back in, but how to do it still keeping the physical distances, the public safety as well. So yeah, you have to look at all these things. As excited as some of us could possibly be of, okay, I can go to work, I can go out and go to work, and you know, a lot of people are saying, "Oh, I want to go to work," but hey, yes, you may be excited, but then also look at the reality of, as you too, like, what does that look for you?
Yep,
do you want to be
absolutely.
standing in lines? Because let's take downtown, for example, or a building with a lot of companies renting out spaces. What does that look like? That actually looks like you have to physically be distanced even in the elevator.
Well,
So
it's funny. I was picturing an elevator in one of those big towers, right, that are always packed, have two elevators going up for every section, 6, 10 elevator banks, whatever it is. How does that work? What is it? One person in an elevator, and how long is it going to take you?
2 or 3 can be in it, depending on the size of the elevator, right?
Most elevators aren't 6 feet wide, though. Maybe 2 if you're at the diagonals, right?
That's what the article that I read last week was saying, that don't rush back to going to work, because this is the reality of it. Is if your office space is in one of those buildings that has all these offices and X amount of people, well, guess what? The elevator space, you still have to practice social distancing. You can take the stairs, no problem, but if you want to,
it's also hard though to social distance. Imagine passing somebody's coming down, you're coming up on the stairs.
Exactly, right? So there are going to be lineups, just like, actually, just picture you going to a grocery store. How has our grocery trip changed, right? We're standing in lines, and how long a grocery trip that could take you 20, 30 minutes to complete is now taking you an hour to 2 hours. Going to Costco, easily 2 hours. I remember my friend and me a couple of weeks ago when we went, she budgeted like an hour or something. I'm like, no, 2 hours. This is going to take us 2 hours or more, right? Something that was never time consuming now because of the social distancing, right? Over the weekend, Home Depot opened. There was lineups to get in there, right? So that lineup is also going to be now in the workspaces. So those that are thinking of going back to work, I want you to think about like what actually is going to look like. The article also mentioned that they're also going to look at implementing checking your temperature before you get in the building. So if you have a fever, they're going to tell you to go back home. So also individuals who may look at going to work, if you think if you are sick, don't come. Don't put other people's lives at risk because you don't know yet.
But that's part of the problem, though, is that there are people who are pressured by their employers that you must come back even if you're sick. And there are a lot of organizations pre-COVID that had that kind of pressure, right? That you're not allowed to miss a day, or you're only allowed to miss certain days. Being sick is looked upon negatively. And so therefore people come to work sick, get everybody else sick, and then take away more days from everybody's work. So that's something that's really important to consider.
But that was I was reading was happening with companies that had open space concept as their office. The research actually showed that more people were going on sick leave.
Oh, don't get me started about open concept. Don't get me because people going away on sick being sick as a result of it is probably down the list of the terrible things about it and why I'm grateful that organizations are moving away. But yeah, you're right.
Right now it's relatable because
Absolutely
that was happening and companies kind of either didn't want to know or turned a blind eye or just weren't even aware of it. The amount of people that were actually going on sick during flu season was actually high in the open space concepts or the tighter space offices, or where you cramped everybody into the office space. So that's why it's so, those companies. That's the thing right now is that regardless of what you were doing before, you can't do that right now because of COVID-19. The social distancing has to continue. Just because you're going to work doesn't mean the social distancing ended. It's actually still it's actually going to be hard, amplified by 10 times more because, as you said in the beginning of this call, was the wave, right? Like, we still want to flatten the curve. We still want people to have their jobs. We still want businesses to run because it's damaging the economy. And the longer we prolong the businesses open, the harder it's going to be for the recovery. So yes, we still have to take some steps to open up the businesses. I love how Doug Ford is doing it in stages, and I think a lot of maybe other provinces or states are doing this too. But we have a plan. We need to follow, but that's not going to look like it's not going to look like what it looked like before COVID-19. So our workspaces are going to change. This is going to have a huge impact. So I'm going to just end the discussion on companies need to practice more than empathy. I think a lot of people actually don't know what empathy is. We hear the word empathy all the time, but one thing I've noticed a lot in the last few months is people don't know empathy.
People think empathy is being nice.
Yeah.
People think empathy is giving people people giving them what they want. And these are not, empathy is really about understanding the other individual, understanding where they're coming from and not applying your biases and your beliefs to where they are coming from as a person.
So practicing empathy first, understand what empathy is, and then practice that more than ever. That is so much more than ever needed. Empathy is so much more needed right now through COVID-19 because everyone's situations are different. And employees that are looking to go back to work, get the full picture of the reality of what does that look like. From you going physically, maybe it's sitting in the car, maybe you have to take public transit, then getting there, what does that look like? The distancings and all that stuff. PPEs, companies have to provide PPEs as well. So both parties have to look at the actual true situation and make a decision. As you said, keeping your employees in mind. Is this the best solution for all involved? Even those leaders that may be hard, you also have to think you are also a human being. If you're going to push hard for people to come to work, you're also going to get infected. This is not a win-win situation for nobody. So it's equally part into this, and the reality is that it's just never going to be the same. Right? It's never going to be the same. So take those steps. Employees, I just want to end the call, this segment on one note, is employees who are looking to go back to work. For the best thing any individuals out there can do for themselves, I think it's more important now than ever, is know your rights. I think a lot of times people actually don't know their rights. So know your rights as an employee. Go onto the your provinces or your state's labor websites, read them, get to know your rights, especially right now during COVID-19. It's more important than ever to know your rights. So when an employer is telling you something and it's violating your right, I'm not telling you to go buck wild on them, but be professional in how you conduct that. Knowing your rights will help you navigate the conversation properly, and obviously you won't be put in a situation which will potentially harm you if you know your rights. So more than ever, know your rights. So we will end this call on that note. Also, employers know the law on what is right for you to do during COVID-19. So both parties need to know their rights and legal obligations and responsibilities under COVID-19. So we will end this segment today. Hopefully you guys all find it useful. If you missed it, you can watch the replay on my LinkedIn profile. It will be up there. It's actually up right now, so you can watch it. We will be back on Thursday, and the topic, we actually spent some time coming up topics. Gil just said bias. So actually, our Thursday segment at 12:30, we're going to talk about biases in recruitment and workplaces. So that is our next segment at 12:30 on Thursday p.m. Eastern time. Tune in. We will see you guys on Thursday. Until then, keep safe, keep practicing social distancing.
Thanks, everyone.
COVID-19 is not over. It's a long process, but together we can make it. We are already making it through this difficult situation together, and we can continue to do this together. So we'll see you guys on Thursday. So until then, bye, and see you guys on Thursday.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.